I want to say a word of thanks to Rick for arranging this. He's the professor of Catholic Studies at the University of Toledo and has contacts all the country and the world, and he's arranging all the lecture series now, and hasn't really. And so, thanks, Rick. I think he's up to 2005 now. And he's got some speakers come semesters we go along. Well, the whole theme this time is on spirituality. And as I suggested in some releases, I wanted to dedicate my lecture evening to Father Yarnold. This past July, he died in Oxford. Some of you remember him. He was here at the University of Toledo. He was actually the first individual who held the chair of Catholic Studies at the University of Toledo. It was a great honor to have an Oxford Don and an internationally known scholar holding that position. Rick stands on shoulders of important people before he came here, including Father Yarnold. He was a big part of the Roman Catholic and Anglican dialogue right from the very beginning. That's been one of the most important and productive dialogues since the Council. And he was one of the original members and served for about 20 years on that particular dialogue. So made great contributions. They found ways to solve about all of the differences really between the Anglican and Roman Catholic churches. They just had to convince the leaders that they had done that. And we're not totally successful in doing that part of it. And Father Yarnold was a wonderful man on spirituality. He taught courses on that here. And so I wanted to publicly honor him on this occasion. He served our university well. I remember our President Horton at the time being so pleased that such a great scholar was the first person to hold this position at the University of Toledo. And he was also a good friend of mine. He used to come and visit. We taught together at Notre Dame in the summers. I remember taking him to baseball games. I played, what do you call that game? Cricket, yes, with him in Oxford. And so I reciprocated by taking him to see some baseball games here in the United States. It's fascinating to explain baseball to somebody who didn't have any direct knowledge of that. So he was a great guy, human fellow, kind, compassionate man, and I want to publicly thank him, remember him, and recall all that he contributed to the University of Toledo and to our parish. Pandora is upset with what is going on in the world. Pandora is very taken with all of the evils in the world. And she has trouble dealing with all of that. In fact, her friends call her Dora, but Dora is upset with things like the war in Iraq. And she sees it going in very bad directions. She's very taken with the fact that the Muslim world is polarizing around opposition to the United States. She sees great difficulties in the future. Her heart breaks over the casualties that are going on in Iraq now. And when she thinks about that, she feels fundamentally helpless. She did all she could to stop the war, all kind of protesting and so on. But when she looks at it, she feels helpless about it. She feels like a pygmy dealing with governmental giants who make decisions that she really cannot control. She's passionate about wanting to bring peace to the world and to avoid this kind of situation, and she's not able to do it. Therefore, she often feels helpless in the midst of all of this. And she's not happy at all being a good Catholic with the sex abuse scandals. The church, she longs for a church that's authentic. She wants to worship with people who are true to the gospel. She wants to have trust in her priests that serve her. She'd like to respect the bishops of the church. And the scandal has really called all of that into question for her. And when that occurs, she feels very confused. it's hard for her to sort it out. She doesn't know who she's more angry at. Sometimes she feels like a character in Kafka's Trial, being unable to get any handle on what is going on. Nothing connects for her. And she thinks about the economic situation. She's doing all right herself, but she thinks about the poor and the people who can't seem to break out of the hellish circle of poverty. And when she thinks about all of the efforts we've made to overcome racism, to make the world a better place, to give opportunities in this affluent country of ours, we don't get any place. She thinks that we're going backwards. You got more people uninsured and more people living below the poverty line. And when she thinks about that, it seems all futile to her. Like she doesn't have any more energy to try to engage this struggle. She just has done all she can do. It all seems futile as she goes along with this. And Dora also has her own personal problems. She suffers from addiction. She struggles with alcoholism. And a lot of times when that comes up, she feels trapped, like she's in a box and can't get out. She doesn't know that addiction seems too strong to her. Feels trapped in this addiction. She doesn't even know where it came from or how she got that way. She just knows it's awfully hard to get out of that trap. Well, Dora's experience is not totally unusual. She has that mixture of what we might call hope and hopelessness going on in her life. And what she desperately wants to do is to hang on to hope. Pandora does not want to let that last thing out of the box. She has to hang on to hope. And she's struggling with that. She knows she needs it. She knows that she'll go down the drain if she doesn't. She just can't function. She needs it. And she has to hang on to it. And she feels it in many ways slipping away. She has to figure out how to keep that hopefulness alive in her everyday activities. So the question is, what kind of resources does Dora find in her Catholic heritage, in her Christian tradition, that are going to help her to deal with this ebbing away of the hope that she desperately clings to? Well, she needs, of course, to look at the Scriptures. And one of the things that we want to do is to try to focus in the Scriptures on a way that is going to help Dora in her life. I mean, there's a lot of things you could do with the Scriptures to try to give her some hope. But I want to look at them in a sort of overall pattern. And you could tell the story of the Scriptures in terms of a large number of epiphanies or theophanies. We say that, don't we? On Mount Sinai, there's this great epiphany of God. God is there present. And all throughout the Scriptures, there's times when God is clearly manifested and unmistakably present. And he speaks to Moses face to face. And he calls the prophets by name to go and do his bidding in the world. So there are manifestations of God clearly in the Scriptures, and you can tell the whole story from that perspective. But I want to tell Pandora the story from another perspective, and that is the perspective of promise and fulfillment. That we look at the Scriptures in terms of God making many promises to the people. Promises to Adam and Eve at the very beginning. And to Noah that he wouldn't destroy the world again by a flood, and puts the rainbow in the sky as a sign of that. And the great promises to Abraham that he would be a great nation. The promises made to Moses and Aaron that he indeed would move the Pharaoh to release the people from their slavery in Egypt. And as you begin to read the Scriptures in that pattern of promise and fulfillment, we see that indeed God has been a faithful God. And in the key moment, of course, in the Hebrew Scriptures, when we see the fidelity of God, is the great Exodus. God had promised to look out for His people, and God had promised to free them, promised to be with Moses and Aaron in their efforts to get the Pharaoh to relent. And sure enough, God comes through. God frees the people from the bondage of Egypt. He gives them political and economic and social freedom. He gives them a new land of their own. He fulfills His promise beyond even their wildest expectations. And when times went badly, and when the kings were not faithful to the covenant, God again spoke to the prophets that He would send a great king, a descendant of David, who would indeed be faithful and would gather the people. He promised in one way or another a Messiah, an anointed one, who would govern the people and bring them great blessings and rewards. And so when we read the Scriptures in that way, then we're set up for the question, does that get fulfilled or not? Does that promise to the Hebrew prophets get fulfilled or not? And in what we call our Second Testament, our Christian Scriptures, we read that the Holy Spirit overshadowed the Virgin, and she brought forth a child. And He would indeed be the Savior of the people. And as we see especially in the Gospel of Matthew, this Savior is indeed the promised one. He's the new Israel taken out of Egypt and brought back to the promised land. He is the new Moses who goes up on the mountain and gives the law, the great Sermon on the Mount. He is born in David's city. He is the son of David, the new king. He is the Son of Man that the prophet Daniel spoke of, who would come on the clouds of heaven finally to save the people. And then, of course, the key event in the New Testament and the Second Testament, the death and resurrection of Jesus. And in that we see the fulfillment of all of the promises, that God indeed was with Jesus as He walked this earth. It's a vindication of His very personhood. It's a validation of His whole message. It's the fulfillment of the cause that He had worked so hard to achieve and accomplish. The death and resurrection then in this story, this promise and fulfillment aspect of the story is centered on that resurrection of Jesus. That's the fulfillment of God's promises. And that's the guarantee that God will keep the promises. And so through the whole of the Second Testament, then we see this tension going on, this tension between the fact that the resurrection has happened and grace has been brought into the world. We have been redeemed. Salvation is available. And yet, the troubling fact that it's not all working out yet, that there still remains evil and suffering and a lack of fulfillment. And so we commonly call that tension between the already and the not yet of God's salvation. The kingdom of God is already here as promised, but it is not yet fulfilled. And that's the tension that we continue to live in, that Christians have lived with throughout all of our Christian history through 2 millennia. Tension between already and not yet. And yet, in this story that we're telling to Pandora, the story centers on the fact that God is faithful always and does fulfill His promises, as shown in the Exodus, as shown in the preaching of the prophets, as shown finally in the incarnation, the death and resurrection of Jesus. And that is our guarantee, therefore, that the final fulfillment will come, that we can trust the promises of God. And that finally is where Dora is going to locate her hope, is within that large framework of promise and fulfillment. She still lives in the gracious hands of the one who has promised never to leave us. Even if the mother should leave or abandon her child, forget her child, yet Yahweh, our God, will never forget us. And that's the tension that Dora has to live with, as all Christians have had to live with. The promise is there, the guarantee is in the resurrection, and we can be sure that the good will finally win out over the evil, that God's will be accomplished in the world, that history will reach its fulfillment, that the whole evolutionary process will get to that high point that we end up calling the parousia, the fulfillment of Christ's work, the second coming of the Lord. Now, that tension throughout all Christian history has played itself out, and people have seen that in different ways, that already and not yet. The great St. Augustine, who is the fountainhead of all theology, as someone said, all of philosophy is just a footnote to Plato, and all theology is a footnote to Augustine. He sort of sets the stage for all this. And Augustine is complex, and I'm always leery of accusing him of certain things. And you could find sentences that would contradict almost anything you say about him. But it's clear the kind of result of all this, his distinction between the city of God and the city of man, remains casting a shadow, a very pessimistic shadow, over the project of making the world a better place, of feeling and experiencing the already of God's grace. I mean, Augustine was living with the collapse of the Roman Empire. It was hard to put a lot of faith in any political program, any economic system that was in place, any social structure. It was hard in that time, as it's all falling apart, to put much faith in any of that. And so Augustine thought of the church as the place where God's will would be worked out. It would be the place where the shalom, the peace that God intended for the world, would be found. And that church remained largely in judgment upon the world. And it came out of all of that a quite pessimistic notion about a number of things. Augustine talked about the massa damnata, the mass of damned people, the whole bunch of human members of the human family who indeed would not be saved. A very pessimistic notion of salvation. And he leaves us very little hope of transforming the world, of making the world a better place, more justice and more peace. Well, that's one strain of thought, and you can trace it throughout all of Christian history right up to our own time. It's very much a future-oriented outlook, in the sense that it says, well, the kingdom will come only at the end time, at the parousia. This world as we know it will continue to be a mess and flawed. And the only thing you can count on one day is, you follow God's calling and will, and you will save your soul, be among the elect, and God will finally straighten out this total mess in what we know as the kingdom of heaven, in the final beatific vision, the great communion at the end time. So there, all the way along throughout history, there's always been Christian thinkers who tend to see the world that way. I mean, I don't know if I want Pandora to hear a whole lot of Augustinian stuff right now. I mean, I'm not sure that that's the kind of thing that really is going to keep her hope alive. There has been throughout Christian history another kind of outlook, a much more present kind of eschatology, as we say, where the emphasis is not on the not yet, but where the emphasis is on the already, ways in which God's grace is already at work. in which you see intimations of the kingdom, which you see clues in ordinary human existence, in social structures, in political revolutions, and all kind of things in the world. You see clues to the fact that God is at work in the world, that the kingdom is being born, that it's already here. And one of the important figures in that whole story is a fellow by the name of Joachim of Fiore, who I think he died in 1202. That would be before Aquinas, for example. And so he talked about 3 different ages that have gone on throughout human history, and his third age was the age of the Spirit. So after the age of Christ passed, in a way, came the age of the Spirit, and with the age of the Spirit, new things would happen. And we could begin to create a better world, and we would see the results of that in human history. It's an example of a very present sort of eschatology, a realized eschatology. It's already here. God's grace is functioning in the world, and it makes a difference. You can see it as structures get humanized, as people get liberated, as human communities form based on mutuality, as progress is made in living out the gospel. You see it in the world. Well, that struggle has gone on ever since. Ever since there have been people, since Joachim in the beginning of the 13th century, espoused that notion of the third age of the Spirit, largely a work of monastic people. That side of notion is kept alive in the church. Periodically people come to that, and people will revive that notion. We see it revived in our own country, in this, what we call the Protestant social gospel. The people who thought that by working painstakingly on our social problems, getting women the right to vote, and getting prohibition passed, and doing those kinds of things, one would create more of the kingdom in this world. And we had people that sort of thought that we could make the world better and better, so that the parousia, that second coming of Jesus, would be just sort of like a boop, just one more little tiny step, and it's all fulfilled now. We'd have gotten better and better. Oh, and people think of the thought of Teilhard de Chardin that way. The evolutionary spiral is moving forward. The human race is improving. Consciousness is deepening. The world is becoming more unified and personalized. And we're doing better and better, a springtime piety. And then at the end time, God would just make the final touch. And we would have achieved the completion of the work of Christ. In one sense, those are caricatures, but they represent tendencies that we have found throughout Christian history. Now, when in the Christian world, the future orientation became so strong, and the dominant notion, like this is a crummy world, just wait and you'll get to heaven. That's how that Christian preachers preach to the slaves in the United States. Just put up with all of this now, because you'll get to heaven one day. And when that became an extreme, something was bound to come into its place. And we saw that happen in the 20th century. Well, it came into place in a secular form of Joachim's outlook that we called Marxism. So Marxism says, well, you Christians got your mind on heaven. Your religion is an opiate, a drug. You don't even think about this world. You're just thinking about the next world and saving your souls. And so Marxism filled the vacuum that was bound to be there and said, well, we know how to make this world better. Well, that's what it's about. We'll have a 5-year plan. And in the 5-year plan, we will create the classless society. If it doesn't work in 5 years, the next 5-year plan will do it. And people believed that. because people want to have hope. I've often quoted Leon Trotsky in the 20s when he was in opposition with Stalin, and he said, when we get this all straightened out, when we get this new age here, the whole world is going to be different. Even human nature will be changed. The voice will become more melodious. And the average person will reach the heights of Aristotle, Goethe, and Marx. And there were people who believed that. I've met people in the Soviet Union who told me they believed that. And it's a representation of that hope in the human heart, not just that we're going to get to heaven one day, but that we can make this world better. And so that image of an already presence of grace that realize eschatology either in religious forms, Christian forms, or in secular forms like communism have stayed alive. Now, it's clear that Dora has to work out her problems within that framework. I mean, she really can't get away from that. She has to somehow, as a Christian person, play with that whole notion that grace is already here but hasn't completed its work, that the kingdom is present but will be fulfilled only at the end time, that Christ has saved us, but redemption will be final only in His second coming. Now, I want to look through where that would take us if I try to slant it. I want to slant it, obviously, for Dora. I mean, you could do this thing in a lot of different ways, but I want to try to talk to her in a way where I think it's going to help her to keep alive this hope, so the last thing in the box doesn't get out and get lost. Well, that's so I want to sort of rethink how we would look theologically at our Christian faith in terms of all of this notion of trying to find a hope, a way in which all of this would function for us. So first of all, we'll talk about how Dora is to understand herself, or what we often call Christian anthropology. Some of us remember from our textbooks that we say we human beings are the rational animals, or we are the ones who are called by God, called by name. Well, in all of this anthropology I want to put hope at the center of it all. And I want to talk about us people who are structured by hope, that have hope at the very center of our lives, so that we end up not doing anything unless we think it's a step towards something else. We don't come to a lecture unless you think you're going to learn something that's going to help you in your life. We function that way. Hope is at the center of all that, so that we are able to achieve some goals. They're hard to achieve, but we could learn something here and put it into practice. Now, this hope that I begin to enunciate here always has to be distinguished from optimism. I think the Marxist plan, 5 years and world better, is optimistic. It was based on human effort. It was facile in many ways, in touch with reality. Marx got one important Christian doctrine, original sin. I mean, it doesn't work. But there was optimism, we could make it work. What we're talking about with Dora here is something else, something that we might call Christian hope, that recognizes that we human beings are finally in the hands of God. Continue to think about who we are. I want to draw a philosopher now, died in 1970s, Ernst Bloch. He's been very influential, a Marxist. He was a secularized Jew. Very interesting fellow, and a lot of Christian theology in the latter part of the 20th century drew his thinking. He wrote a 3-volume work on hope, and I've got one of the books mentioned in there, more accessible, on his own. He's an atheist, but he writes a lot of hope. Where another secularized Sigmund Freud wrote about night dreams and how they are instinctive to us. Ernst Bach wrote about daydreams and claimed that our dreams were extremely important to us, that our daydreams revealed to us the possibilities of human existence, of what we'd like to be. You know, somebody emphasized doing something great. That'd be an example. Our daydream maybe suggest kind of directions we might want to go in. And our dreams reveal to us the unfinished character of our existence. We're finished yet, not complete. You know, there's more to go, more to do in life. There's more things that we can accomplish as we go along. And our daydreams often reveal a dark side of us. Oh, we fantasize getting back at somebody, and revenge is part of the daydreams at times, and how we'll display our anger in ways. So our daydreams are very interesting things to think about. Our dreams tell us about the possibilities of human existence, of where it could go. And so Dora can dream of a world that lives in peace. She can imagine a church that is truly a sign, a credible sign of God's presence. Or she can envision dealing more constructively with her addiction. She can dream of a better world. And of course, Dora's real charge here is to keep those dreams alive. Don't let the dreams die. Hope functions from within the core of our being. We are hopeful creatures. It isn't like, well, we function in life and then maybe we could put in a little dose of hope somewhere along the line. Hope has to be at the core of who we are, influencing the way we feel and think about life. And so there is an emotional side to hope that sort of mobilizes our emotions and gets us in gear so that we could accomplish some good things. There's sort of an intellectual side to hope, in which we would realistically look at what's going on in our world. Dora would have to be realistic about what can be accomplished in the political order, as to understand how a representational form of government works. Maybe she has to wait till the next election before she can make her voice heard again on finding people who represent in the government more her viewpoints in life. So there's sort of a realism, an intellectual side to it that has to be worked out. And one has to find out sort of what I'd call flexible means of trying to accomplish all of that. When we think about ourselves as hopeful creatures, we usually think it's not enough to just hope that I'm going to get through today. And that's part of it. I do hope we get through today. We can manage all of our responsibilities today, all of that. But hope tends to enlarge. Like, well, I want to get through today so that I can sleep tonight and enjoy tomorrow. So hopes tend to coalesce, to combine into larger and larger visions. So it's not going to be enough for Dora just to think, I hope I deal with my addiction. She'll probably get imprisoned if she does that. She's going to have to keep hope alive for a better society. That's healthy for her, for a more peaceful world, for a better church. That will help her. If she just focuses in narrowly on one hope, she's probably going to feel more entrapped and imprisoned in all of that. As Aquinas pointed out to us in writing in the 13th century, in the second part of the Summa, questions 17 to 22, Aquinas takes up this question of hope. And he, as always, he looks at hope in terms of its object. Its object is to be with God. That's what it's finally all about, to be with God. And God is the only one who can get us there. So that's why we call hope a theological virtue. It's concerned with our relationship fundamentally with God. And as Aquinas said, you can't have too much hope in God. You can't have too much dependence upon God. That can just flourish. You have to develop that as much as we can. But he says you can get out of balance as you try to live that out. And one of the ways you get out of balance is you become too pessimistic. You fall into despair. You think that the things I need to get there, I can't find. On the other hand, the danger is that one falls into a utopian presumption in which one thinks it will all work out without doing anything. Thus, God will forgive me even though I'm not repentant, to use one of Aquinas' own examples. So that part of this hope that we're trying to develop is finally centered on God. Total submission to God, total faith and trust in the great God. So it's possible to err by living in a dream world, and it's possible to err by becoming just cynical about everything. So Dora's danger is going to become cynical about government, about the church. There's nothing good in the church, nothing good going on in the world. So Dora sinks into a cynicism. Well, okay, that's my effort to say something about us from the viewpoint of hope. We're people who are unfinished, who are in process, who are looking to the future, who have possibilities of doing things in a better way and making the world a better place. Now we think about God. How do I want to suggest to Dora that she images God? Well, there's a common way of imaging God, that God is above Dora, looking down on her, and that might be helpful. It might be helpful for Dora to think about God inside of her, within. Sometimes she might even think of God behind her. But I want to ask her, suggest that she thinks about God as the one in front of her, the one drawing her into the future, alluring her into a better place in the world. A God of the future, the God of the absolute future, the God who is in front of us, drawing us forward. I've used this example before, and it comes back to my mind now of Bob Anderson when he was dying. And I remember that wonderful conversation I had with him, and I asked him what was going on in his soul, and he said he felt like he was going down a river, and that God was in front of him, towing him. The Lord was towing him down the river, and there are all kind of bends and turns in the river. And it was exciting to see what would be beyond the next turn in the river. God in front of him. And I said, that's a marvelous image, it's a wonderful thing. And he says, and what I see most clearly is now that I never saw before, that God was towing me down that river my whole life. Was always in front of me, pulling me forward, attracting me through my passions, my desires, through the eros, the erotic side of me, attracting me forward. So we see a God very different maybe from the God above or below or behind, within. A God who's creating the future for us. This God is unknown. There's many ways in which this God is absent. That's one of the things I want to tell Dora. Just because God feels absent doesn't mean that God is gone, disappeared. He appears to be absent because he's in the future. So you see, in this theology I'm enunciating, there's a lot of sense of the absence of God. The mystics always tell us about the presence of God. This theology of hope I'm enunciating has a great feeling for the absence of God, the encounter with silence, the sense that the prayers aren't being heard, that God's not with me, that I'm walking alone. All of that fits into this notion of a God in the future, surely present, but not always in a way that I can feel or that touches my soul in a direct way. But this is a God who we can count on, a God of absolute fidelity, the God who keeps the divine promises. The God who raised Jesus to life will finally bring peace to the human family. The God of the resurrection of Jesus will finally right all the wrongs and balance the scales. The final word with this God is a great resounding yes in the whole universe. And when we begin to think of Christ in this way, then we see him clearly as the fulfillment of the promises. In Jesus we see that all that God had foretold, all the prophets talked about, has come to pass. His resurrection is the key moment in all of human history. The seeds of the final victory are planted. The source of our tears are dried up at their very root. It's all different because of that. The whole New Testament is written from that viewpoint. And so Jesus becomes so for us the model of confronting the troubles in life. And so the liberation thinkers so much in line with what I've been talking about here, like to stress the historical Jesus. And stressing historical Jesus, they want to see, look at what he went through, how he was abandoned by his friends, how he was understood by his family, rejected by religious leadership, put to death by political power, all the way along, nothing but trouble, and feeling abandoned by his Father. And yet, full Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. So we see a Christology there, of Jesus fulfilling the promises and giving us an example of how we need to live. And for Dora, I want to suggest to her that church is not a sign of the kingdom, but an instrument of the kingdom. Church has a servant role. She's right, of course. We lose her credibility when we're not a faithful church. When any of us that we contribute to the sinfulness of the church, we mess up the power of being this sign and instrument. She's right about that. You can't get away from it. But I want Dora to see the ways as well in which the church is instrument of the kingdom, the good things that are happening. I probably want to remind her that according to the New York Times, we got about 1.8 of the priests who have been accused reasonably about sexual abuse. That means we got like more than 98% who haven't been. It's that kind of thing that maybe I want to keep before Pandora as she wrestles with all of this. The church does need, as Augustine taught us, and as people like Karl Barth have made clear, we must be a confessing church. We must be a church that's in judgment upon the culture. We have to be a church ready to say no to wars that don't meet the just war criteria. We need to say, speak out against injustice. The church has to live with that tension of the culture, but we do so shaped by the resurrection. A community of people who say, no, finally, I don't know how this is going to work out, but it's finally in God's hands. And the reason I believe that is that the faithful one raised Jesus to life, and he became life-giving spirit for all of us. A big part of what is involved in this rethinking of theology from this viewpoint of hope is the Christian obligation in the world to try to challenge the unjust structures, to make the world a better place. All part of what we really need to do as Christian people. And with all of this, can't leave it to the Marxists or the secularists, let's put it that way. They don't know how to do it. They don't do it well because they're always in danger of creating a new utopian order, making an idol out of their own project. Always the secularists, the ideologies fall into that danger, begin to worship the state or worship an individual or whatever. So we are the ones who have the power to keep the future open, to make sure that we challenge all of the ways of trying to create totalitarian systems or overarching paradigms that want to enshrine a new ideology. And for Dora, need to keep in mind that indeed we do have a final hope. And that final hope is not just individualistic, but it's collective. And that's one of the dangers, one of the things you got to remind her. This isn't just about Dora getting to heaven. It really isn't. No, it's about the whole human family achieving its fulfillment. It's about a new heaven and a new earth. No, it's about Christ bringing the fullness of creation into the divine presence. No, there's a communal, collective side to the final fulfillment that our friend Dora has to keep in mind as she works her way through all of this. Yes, there's the possibility of it getting messed up for individuals. Hell remains a possibility, and we can't get around that. But death represents our only chance to escape. It was the Russian philosopher Berdyaev who said that if life just went on as we know it now, it would indeed be hell. Our only way out is death. The only way to find something better than this is death. And there's probably only a tiny minority of people on the earth who don't understand that. And that would be composed largely of affluent Americans. Probably only a tiny minority in the whole earth who don't understand that statement. That death is our only chance for happiness, our only way out. Now, so that's sort of my theology of hope that I want to put before human beings striving and a God in the future and a church that has to be faithful to the resurrection of Jesus. Now I want to offer more practical advice to Dora in dealing with all of this. How we're going to develop this spirituality of hope. First is the great importance of family life. If Dora wants to make a contribution to hope in the world, one of the things she wants to do is create a stable family life for her children. She wants to lavish love on her children and eventually on her grandchildren. Because it seems clear that it is in that setting that we develop what we might call fundamental trust. That's what Erik Erikson called it and others. It's in that setting. No, that's why one of the real reasons that Dora wants to get over her addiction, one of the strongest reasons she wants to get over it, so she can be a stable parent. And so that her children have something definite to go on and don't have to wonder if she's going to be drunk tonight or not and impossible to deal with. So we know that if we're going to build hope in the world, it is right there in the family setting. And everybody has to make their contribution creating stable families where people can feel trust, feel that they're wanted, can develop their potential. An important part of all of this. Fundamental trust. Second thing that my advice to Dora is that she must remain a person of prayer even when God seems absent. She has to develop her sense of dependency upon God. For her, prayer has to be a form of truth-telling. When she prays, she's in touch with the deepest truth, that the world is in the hands of God. And that finally it's God who saves the world and not her. No, she's not the Messiah, though she may feel the urge to do that at times. That is a fundamentally freeing notion, that God will never abandon us. That's the deepest truth. That's we say humility is truth. Prayer helps us see the truth about life. And the truth is we're in the hands of the gracious one. And she will never abandon us, no matter what. So I want Dora to keep her prayer life alive. The next thing that I want her to do is cultivate the power of imagination. Imagination is closely allied with hope. Imagination is absolutely crucial when we find ourselves in the box, entrapped, feeling futile, not being able to find ways out. Imagination allows us to envision other possibilities. Just talking to somebody recently about people who are on welfare and had that whole experience of not being able to accomplish anything, and they go and try to make something happen. The word comes out, no, and that just is so debilitating. No, and the great hope. I mean, Václav Mali told me about the same thing about the Czech people after they were out from under the thumb of the communists. Where the great need, pastoral need, was to help people keep their imaginations open. So you can imagine a different way of living, that you can imagine possibilities when a door is closed. Have to keep looking for alternatives. Try to maintain perspective on situations. Part of it, Dora needs to think about the church that way, a larger perspective. We believe the Spirit is with the church. We've been through other crises. Not everybody is messing up in this church. There's actually some good people around. All perspective points that Dora could keep in mind. Remember that the boundaries of the possible are wider than they seem to be. The moral art, is to be able to imagine other ways of accomplishing particular goals. Got to be sure we don't get imprisoned in the present moment. The economy is bad now. The economy's a mess now. Everyone has to remember that there were times when it functioned better. So that we don't get imprisoned. There was this psychotherapist, Henry Stack Sullivan, one of the things when people were depressed that he would ask them, well, when did that start? And what was he doing? Forcing them to put it into context. Well, 3 weeks ago I was doing fine. I felt good, and so on. It started that Sunday afternoon. Now we got it in context. That's the work of imagination, to reconstruct the past so we can make some sort of sense out of it all. Avoid brainwashing ourselves. If Dora just keeps concentrating on what's wrong, she's in great danger of losing that hope. She has to think as part of her prayer, as part of her mental apparatus, to think about the good things that are happening, the successes in her own life, in society, progress that we've made. Otherwise, she will brainwash herself into some sort of despair. She has to keep alive her passion, her eros. That phrase of Irenaeus you always quoted, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. She has to get excited about something. She has to think that there's a new way to work at peace that she's going to get with another group, and she's going to find another way around this. She's going to find something else in her life that excites her. We have to be alive. We have to expand our interests. She needs to be concerned about other people and not herself. She's going to stay passionate about fighting injustice. She's going to be happy about the growth that goes on in her own life. Got to have eros, passion. Got to be able to wish. Wishing is an important part of hope. Wishing for something better. I have a line in the notes about the problem with Dora is she's in great danger of living in between hope, a hopeful outlook, and hopelessness, and never either being in either side, just wallowing around in sort of a shadowy, dark area. It's like grieving, never getting over the grief, never getting on with it, and never really grieving. To live in that shadow land is destructive. She can't do that. Next, Dora has to embrace the dark side of existence. To admit the emotions like anger and jealousy that get in the way. She has to admit she's powerless over the alcohol. She has to deal. Somebody was talking to me the other day about, I suppose you're going to tell me I have to forgive these people who were so mean to me. And I says, well, not until you get deal with the anger until you hit the pillow for a while. Oh, don't rush to forgiveness. Don't rush to paper it over. Make sure you face the dark side before you get there. To reject all the utopian dreams that we're going to suddenly have a peaceful world, or the sense that we can make it all happen. Be important for Dora to participate in the church. I want her to keep coming to liturgy. It's liturgy where we revive our hopes, where we celebrate the death and resurrection of Jesus, that we remember there's a final fulfillment. I think it's great for Dora to be in a small faith-sharing group so she can sit there and listen to other people who are hurting about the war, or upset about the economy, or mad at the church, so she can hear other people articulate that and see how they're trying to deal with it. Sharing hope is not just an isolated emotion. It's a virtue that connects us in with a whole lot of other people, with the whole Christian family that's trying to remember that God is the faithful one. Dora needs to learn how to wait constructively. We need to live as Advent people with an expectation that something good can happen. It's not going to happen tomorrow. One of the psychotherapists, I think it was William Lynch, great book, by the way, Images of Hope, that people want to delve into this. It's in the bibliography there. Images of Hope, William Lynch, very striking book, great ideas in it. And one of his ideas is that a great mark of maturity is to be able to be passionate about making something better, say achieving racial justice, passionate about it, and intelligent about it. You do what you can, work at it, join a group, help out, but be able to wait for concrete results without bitterness and without frustration. It's his idea of how a hopeful person would look. They're not passive, they're passionate. They're excited. They're going to work at it, and they're going to do it with intelligence, and they're going to do it with others. But they're not going to get bummed out every day because we don't suddenly find the kind of justice that we want immediately. And finally, we need to put on the mind of Christ. Wonderful phrase from the Paul literature, put mind of Christ. See the world with his eyes. Let wisdom structure imagination, the grid through which we look at the world. His example guide us. And I suggest as wind up to put that together to reflect on the agony garden. The idealism of it all. The great pain of finding the kingdom not established and the end time to do it running out. Great desire to God to intervene, to straighten it out, this chalice free. And yet the kind of acceptance that based not a passivity, but an active, powerful acceptance that not my will but thine be done. Let's take a couple of minutes, stand up, break. Invite when you go out, the light is fixed, it's times as long green as usual. And if people make the supreme sacrifice and are willing to turn right, as hard as that might be for a liberal group, this. We could go out twice as fast. People who are double parked need to move. You can go out and move your car and come back. We'll end at 7. May Houghton next week. Don't miss it.
Nice to talk to the speaker.
How you doing? Nice to see how you been. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, good for you. Did you sign it for me?
I did.
Good for you.
I did.
Thank you.
And the talk was superb. And I have 2 questions. One, would you ever be available for our increases St. Martinville? Or are you just out of work for that?
Oh, I'd listen to an invitation.
Okay. And how much of an honorary?
Oh, nothing. I'd do it for nothing.
Well, I'm going to talk to Pat. This is a wonderful guy from Northern Ireland.
Okay. It's very kind of you.
Because priests, diocesan priests don't need spirituality. They don't need it in
I got it for you. No, I got it. I brought it. Jennifer's got it. It's in- Could I have your attention, please? Why don't we see if we can get started again? Do we have microphones for people? Who's got? Cheryl's got a microphone.
Pam.
And Pam's got a microphone. Just push a button. My friend, Sister Patricia is here.
Hi.
She's unable to endure silence.
That's true. I'm a rescuer. I needed to rescue you from not having anyone ask a question. In regard to the current troubles over in Iraq, how would you support hope in those who really don't see anything to be hopeful about other than God will have the final word, and ultimately, you know, we're working toward that? Are there any signs that you perceive right now that could help perhaps offset the, you know, really massive depression and almost despair on the part of those who really invested themselves to attempt to affect the actions of the administration, apparently unsuccessfully?
I mean, that's a key question I suppose many of us are looking at right now. As people know from the recent Reflection article, I mean, when I look at the bad things that can happen from all of this long term, I mean, you had the horrible things of casualties and American servicemen being ambushed and Iraqi civilians being killed. I mean, so many bad things. Out of all that, I mean, what worries me more than anything else is the polarization in the Muslim community. There's 1 billion Muslims in the world. And by the time our young people die, there'll probably be more Muslims than Christians in the world. And you cannot just alienate 1 billion people. So, I mean, when I look at what's bad and sharpen your point, it seems to me that is the great difficulty that we face. Long-term damage. You know, who knows how long that would last in the minds of Muslim people. And it's the Muslim religious leaders who are articulating this. You know, even the moderate leaders are saying that this war against Iraq is a war on all of Islam. So, I mean, you know, if I sharpen your point in terms of really looking bleak, that's it. Now, I mean, one of the signs of hope that I see is the great possibility that here in the United States we could model dialogue with between Christians and Muslims, that we could, and it's actually happened on our campus. It's actually happened on our campus, and our Catholic Student Association has done a wonderful job of reaching out to the Muslim Student Association. They've done things together, and very visibly and symbolically. I was recently on a panel discussion with a rabbi and an imam myself. So, I mean, I think that there's opportunity that way in our world. If you start to look at it from any other way, I mean, I think you're just going to turn off people. I mean, I do think that, you know, and you might probably be one of them who would respond very negatively to this, but I mean, the fact that we have weapons that can destroy a building right here and not the building next door, that at least offers the possibility of reducing civilian casualties. I'm not saying it's going to happen, and I mean, if you go to urban warfare, it probably isn't going to make a lot of difference. But, I mean, that's a way in which you could think of a technological advance as actually reducing the carnage of war. So, I mean, I do think that there's many ways in which we are trying to do that now. I would think, you know, the peace movement might be very alert to the fact, you know, the war is going on and no amount of demonstrations is going to stop it right now. But there still is the question of how we fight it. And I mean, I think that's a question that's up in the air yet. And it'll be the question of how we deal with the Iraqi cities, and especially Baghdad. And, I mean, and there probably are ways of doing it that are going to create a lot more civilian casualties and ways that will create fewer. So Jean Bethke Elstein, in supporting the war according to just war criteria, ended up saying that once the war started, that we always remember there's a jus in bello criteria as well. That is, criteria on how war should be fought. No more violence than needs to be perpetrated, and trying to avoid civilian casualties, things like that. So maybe there's a role yet for the peace movement, and was not able to stop the war, but maybe there's a way in which we yet can keep it, the civilian casualties down, or keep it fought within the parameters of that just war tradition. Jus in bello, as we call it, the way the war is fought. I do think that long term the real question is Christian-Muslim dialogue. And wherever we can promote that is extremely important, and any progress made will be vital. And part of my sense is the United States is about the only place where you can really have it now. It's hard to imagine it happening in other parts of the world, a real honest, open, critical dialogue. And yet it's possible here in our country, and it's one of the great glories of our culture that we can have that kind of dialogue. So that would be one place where we might locate some hope. I do think, I mean, in many things human, I don't just dismiss the thing that it's finally in God's hands. The God of the future is a God of surprises. God of surprises. I mean, odd things happen. We ended up getting Pope John the 23rd. No one would have ever guessed that. You know, strange things happen in history. And so we have to, that reliance on the God of the future is not just idle talk, I don't think, that it's vital to maintaining a healthy mental attitude.
Hi.
Hi, Beth.
I'm not sure if people are familiar with what happened at the Oscars last weekend. Michael Moore, the director for Bullying for Columbine, won an Oscar, and during his acceptance speech, he was very vocal about being against the war in Iraq. And my mom sent me an email today about an article that she had read, and a reporter over in Iraq had been with some soldiers who had gotten hurt, some Iraqi soldiers who had gotten hurt, and he introduced himself to one of the soldiers, and he was afraid at first that they knew that he was American, and the soldier that he had introduced himself to told him that he had heard about what Michael Moore had said during the Oscars, and said that that gave him hope that that there are Americans who are against the war and against civilians, Iraqi civilians getting hurt. And that was very courageous for Michael Moore to get up in front of all those people. He's gotten a lot of fire for that. My question is, what kind of advice do you give to those of us who are receiving flack from our peers because we're against the war?
Yeah, that's obviously something that happens. I know Pat was telling me the same thing happening in her circles, peace movement, and fear that even actually that one would turn off people who are sort of in some middle ground on all of this. I think part of it is to have the courage of our convictions, the sense that if we're doing the right thing, that we need to be sort of at ease within our own heart about it. And it happens not just with the war, but with anything. If you take a public stand or stand up for values, I mean, you get criticized. And people have various degrees of tough skin. I mean, some people get hurt by every little comment, and others seem more able to withstand kind of criticism. I think, we start out with sort of the sense that if you do stand up for your principles, that people aren't going to like it, that there will be, one is bound to get some flack. I sort of think starting out that way is helpful. I always, I've learned over the years to steel myself against attack, and I find out that when I am able to do that, one of my tricks is I will turn it and I will ask myself the question, why is he attacking me now? And the psychology of that is, that I found to be effective, is it takes it off the feeling like, ooh, what did I do wrong? Or, how did I mess up or something? And it shifts the psychology to emphasis on what's going on inside of that person's head or heart. And over the years, I have found that to be quite effective. And part of it is like being prepared for attack. So I would start out with figuring, if I preach on this question in this way, I'm going to get attacked. So when it happens, I'm not surprised, but I'm sort of ready for it. If I write an article on a certain types of topics, I know my hate mail will multiply. So I sort of start out with that premise. And I find preparation like that for the attack is helpful. And then, we get back to, as Christian people, we say we follow Jesus. He says, well, you're going to be my follower. You have to take up the cross and follow me. They persecuted the master, they're going to persecute you. I think there's a danger of that in feeling self-righteous, like I'm with the master and they're not. I think we got to be careful of that. I think it's a great danger of ending up being self-righteous about our positions. I see people still trying to get out of the parking lot. No one will turn right. It's incredible. Just amazing. Anyway, Beth has made a very good point. So I'm sort of offering a theological response, Beth, that says, we're following Jesus and got to take up the cross, and that's the price you pay for standing up. The other part is psychological, and how to prepare oneself for attack so that one doesn't get bent out of shape because somebody doesn't like what you said. Bound to happen. We have somebody with a... will you wait? You're not going to wait. Why don't we get him a microphone, as long as he's going to talk? Somebody had a microphone. I thought we would let them talk, but this Angie is very gracious. She will share her mic with you.
As I've observed the Christian-Muslim dialogue that you often mention, Father, isn't the problem of the dialogue that it should be between the Christian left and the Muslim right, rather than what usually goes on? It's a dialogue between, like here at University of Toledo, between the Christian left and the Muslim left. So that's no dialogue at all.
I wouldn't characterize that way myself. I mean, I would say I don't know that the left and right fits for Islam. You know, you can say it progressive, conservative for the Catholics, and I think a lot of that dialogue has been carried on more by progressive Catholics. But my characterization of Islam is very different in the dialogue partners. Not left and right doesn't really make a lot of sense to me in that context. So what does make sense is whether the Muslim participants are self-critical or not. And my response to that is most often they are not. And one understands that. I mean, Catholics weren't self-critical either in the 50s when people said, the United States said, you know, we were dealing with the native as prejudice, or no Catholic could be president. You know, I mean, Catholics were not self-critical then because we had to stand together and stand up against the waspish majority in the country. So, I mean, I understand that, but again, I keep looking for self-critical Muslim dialogue partners. And as a matter of fact, at the last dialogue on campus, we had a self-critical Muslim, which is unbelievable. I mean, and he took a lot of flack. I mean, you talk about courage. And, you know, he said essentially that one of their problem was that they had not sort of reinterpreted their religious tradition as well as they should in the last couple centuries. It's just, he caught a lot of flack. But to me, that's the question in the dialogue. Isn't left or right in the Muslim community? It's, are they open, and will they be self-critical?
We have some people who can't get out because these people are double parked.
We need cars to move that are double parked. ALA 8668, CKX 4298. We'll all stand up now. No. That was our only plea, that double parkers would move. Yeah, Angie?
My question is this. And one of the things that your paper says is death is our freest moment. Yeah. And you went on to describe death as a chance to achieve happiness. Can you discuss this in light of euthanasia or mercy killing?
Yes, it raises a whole other series of moral questions. We just had a dialogue on campus on that the other night. It is a distinctive notion of death. It's borrowed from Karl Rahner and very unusual for people. People usually think of death as separation of body and soul, or my body dies and my soul lives, and sort of the Grim Reaper comes and gets us. Rahner's notion is so different. He thinks that death is our freest moment, and when we are called upon to hand ourselves over and we make a decision at death, whether we will live selfishly and autonomously or whether we will hand ourselves over to the gracious mystery, and sort of all the chips are on the table, and it's our chance to make definitive our option for God. Now, one of the things that, I mean, I can't go into a whole morality of euthanasia and so on, but one thing you could say is we really don't want to deprive people of that opportunity to prepare for that moment. You know, what the experience in Holland is, that where it's now legalized, that there's a feeling that people get pressured into it to accepting, assisted suicide or accepting euthanasia at the hands of a friend or relative. So it would be just one part of it that I would say, if death is what Hunter thinks it is, and I think in some ways corresponds with our Christian understanding, then we wouldn't want that kind of interference in it all. In dealing with euthanasia, many things. Life is a gift from God, and it's to be prized and treasured, not an absolute. And so, therefore, we things like, yes, we can remove the feeding tube for somebody who's in a vegetative state, a solid part of Catholic moral. You can take the tube out. Somebody in a persistent vegetative state, not functioning humanly. On the other hand, if somebody is communicative, to inject them with something that's going to kill them would be wrong. Well, that would be sort of the parameters of that 8. But I think it plays into it. You've intuited by your question of what we think about death has a role to play in what decisions about that. I think you're fundamentally right in linking those two. We get a microphone for Eileen. We have one.
I have one. On the topic of Christian Muslim, Catholic Muslim dialogue, how would one of us respond to the idea that the Muslims kick us out of the country? The Muslims won't let us evangelize in their countries, so why should we openly let them evangelize in our country?
Yes. I don't know if you have a concrete example. The Muslims will say that people of the book, Jews and Christians in their lands, have always been treated with respect historically. They've been forced into conversions, then they've been free to function. Often there was extra tax or something like that, but their contention would be that Christians have been treated well in Muslim lands. So I think you would get a denial of the premise on the part of many Muslims. On the other hand, our society is a free one, and we do have a lot of I don't know what the right word is, proselytizing, is that neutral enough? Islam is free to preach, and they do it in a lot of different settings, and drive down Dorr Street and you can encounter the black Muslims handing out their papers and so on. So, it's the very character and nature of our country. Most Muslim countries are not pluralistically democratic like our country is, which is one of the issues that stands behind all this war and where it's going to go and what we're going to do afterwards. This idea of saying we're going to create a democratic country in Iraq is, you talk about utopian idealism, that's right up there high on the list. Not dealing with people with a history of democratic procedures, or people much inclined that way. One of the great theoreticians of Islam believes that, one of the most wicked, nefarious things about our system, and that we've tried to voice in them, is the separation of church and state. He thinks that's like the original sin that we have committed. Out of all the other terrible things we've done, the worst thing of all, this guy, you pronounce it Qutb, something like that, Q-U-T-B. He died under Nasser killed him in 1966. Wrote many volumes on the Quran. A great theoretician and influential on Osama bin Laden and a lot of the radical movement. But his own sense is that the worst thing we've done out of all the terrible things is propagate the separation of church and state. And any attempt to impose that, which is probably at the basis somehow of, the democratic polity as we know it, to try to voice that on the Islamic world, I'm telling you, will bring up more radicalism than about any other thing you could think of. Because this man is very influential, and it's bought by many Muslim scholars. I'd say it's generally bought. Well, the Muslims I've encountered in this world don't even understand it. It's not like they're against it. It's like, what do you mean? How could church and state be separated? It's not like they just don't, it's beyond the pale of their understanding. It's outside of anything they could even imagine in their world. And that has to be respected. I mean, so anything, anyway, so we have a different sense of freedom about all of that, and so I think it's built into the two different systems. They're going to have more chances to proselytize the United States for Islam than Christians are going to have in any Islamic country. It's just the way it is. Ladies and gentlemen, let's call it a night with a ringing call to turn right going out. Or you'll be here forever. I certainly do, Pat. Nice to see you. I certainly do.
We wanted to come tonight because we haven't seen you in such a long time.
Nice to see you.
Been a while.
It is a long time. Thanks for coming.
Oh.
Kind of it. Yeah, better.
How long have you been?